There were other candidates that we wanted to follow that were more front-runner candidates that I pursued hard, but most of them turned us down because they didn't see any value in having us around. They were interested in us when we first walked up because they thought maybe we were everyday media and going to do something that would be on the air. When they found out we were doing a documentary, it was like, forget it.
Yes, I'm doing a documentary right now. Could you please give me a call back?
What do I think about the city? I actually love it and hate it.
That's Chicago, bro.
Yes, all one big happy family.
On average, out in the field, there was one team, sometimes two. And by two, I mean my son Jackson would be out shooting solo on something while me and Zach Piper were out shooting our thing. But we also had some key people who worked with us, like Jania Smith and Sylvetta Christmas, two of the field producers. It was a very, very small crew and undertaking, even though we worked a lot. We started shooting on July 4th, 2018, and we continued shooting off and on all the way up to October of 2020. The main camera on City So Real was a Canon C300 Mark II with a 12 to 20 Fujinon Cabrillo lens, which is a pretty fabulous lens for documentary work. By the time we got to that fifth episode, we had shot over 400 hours of material. Between myself and my co-editor, David Simpson, we each edited for about 9 months to 10 months to complete the series.
The complaints of the people are ignored and neglected. If Jason Van Dyke is found guilty, he will be the first Chicago police officer convicted of murder.
When did the idea for City So Real occur to you? When did you decide you wanted to do something sort of broad like this about Chicago?
You know, the idea occurred to me probably, 15 years ago. I'd been in Chicago for about 20 years at that point and thought, well, I've been here long enough. It wasn't really until this mayoral election rolled around, starting in 2018, that I thought this is the perfect time, because this promised to be the most sort of wide open mayoral election and mayoral election of consequence for the city. And I knew it was going to coincide with the trial for the murder of Lacquan McDonald. And I just thought, well, this is the time to go do this. And I also knew that I didn't want this series or film at that time, and what became a series, to feel like that's all this film is about, that it's just about a mayoral race and a trial. I wanted it to be a portrait of this city, and sort of taking inspiration from Chris Marker and the way in which he encountered people in very serendipitous ways and would engage with them and talk to them and hear from them. I knew that we wanted to do that as well. And, you know, the weird thing is at first it was hard. I mean, I'm a filmmaker that very much believes in, you go out with a certain idea, but you remain open and you let the story take you where it takes you. I mean, that's fundamental to how I approach these things. But this was a whole other level of serendipity and sort of openness, because, you know, usually on films, people will see you in the streets or something and come up and they're curious and they're like, hey, what are you doing? I mean, it's nice that they're interested, but it's a distraction and you try to gracefully get away from them. On this film, it was sort of like, well, come on over here. And you know, we encountered many people who became subjects in that very way. We'd be in an Uber ride, because that's how we got around a lot during the day. And the driver was really interesting, and she was a fan of one of the candidates. And I just said, hey, do you mind if I come in the front seat and film you? And she was like, okay. And, you know, it becomes, for me, one of the more sort of moving sequences in the whole series that was totally unexpected.
You know, and it's like ever since Trump got into office, you know, everybody just showing like their true colors and everything, you know, and it's like, nobody's born racist, it's taught.
As we got into it more and became more comfortable with going out at the beginning of a day and knowing that we were going to film one thing and not knowing where we were going to end up that day, once we were able to fully embrace that, it became incredibly liberating for me as a filmmaker and for my collaborators. In some ways, it was the most fun I've ever had making a film.
So how did you approach the campaigns? How did you end up embedding in the ones that you did?
When we started filming, there soon became over 20 candidates for mayor. I mean, I knew even before it got that high, there was no way we were going to try to follow them all. That would be madness. I knew we wanted to try to follow a diverse array of candidates if we could, because it was a diverse field of candidates. I also knew that if we could, we wanted to follow someone, at least one candidate who might be perceived as a kind of front-runner type candidate, a candidate that really actually could become mayor of Chicago. But then I also just wanted to pick people that were interesting and fascinating to us, regardless of their prospects for winning. That's how we ended up with Lori Lightfoot originally, which is ironic, given that, spoiler alert, she wins. But she was not considered a front-runner candidate, but she was an interesting candidate.
Maybe I'll be doing this with my daughter if I get old.
Neil Salas Griffin literally came in last in the race, but he may be the most prominent candidate in some ways in the whole series. And that's because he was just such an interesting, fascinating, inspiring guy. We wanted to be intimate with candidates, but we didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of their campaigns so much as we wanted to see the whole process of politics in Chicago, which is what led us then in a big way to places like the Board of Elections, where the petition process challenge was going on.
We're behind where we need to be, but it's based on a obviously subjective assessment of our signatures. And the best example I have of this is my mom's signature. On my page that I got was determined to not be authentic.
That's such a fascinating scene about such a boring process. For lack of a better word, it's not baseline interesting, but in the editing room, how do you make that compelling?
We spent quite a bit of time there, and the more time we spent there, the more fascinating the sort of Byzantine nature of it was, and the more it sort of spoke, we felt, to what politics are in Chicago, this kind of blood sport that seeps even into the most prosaic parts of the process of just trying to get on a ballot. It may be quiet, but it's a battleground. And we were spending so much time there, we started joking that if Frederick Wiseman were making this film, that the entire film would be called Board of Elections. And it'd be great. It'd be great. But that would be it. That would be the whole film, because that would totally be what he would want to do. And it didn't hurt to have some fireworks either. It didn't hurt that Ricky Hollywood Hendon, got into it twice at the Board of Elections. You know, Neil, you just feel for him because he's so earnest and so wants to do everything right, and he's getting screwed. So all of these things, I think, contribute to, you know, hopefully pulling the viewer into this process that otherwise is quite dry and can seem boring.
Sir, how can he rule that I cannot remove my objection?
You are not a party.
I am a party to this case.
Are you Ronisha Dobine or Nina Stoner?
No, I'm not.
Then you are not a party to this case.
You know who I am. Don't play like you don't know who I am.
And for that fifth episode, which was filmed completely amid pandemic in a totally different situation than you had to shoot everything else, what was challenging about going back and doing it this way?
Yeah, so for the fifth episode, I had the idea that we should do it when the pandemic hit, because I thought, you know, we've done this series, but I didn't want it to feel like ancient history. But by the time George Floyd hit, it felt like it was absolutely vitally necessary for us to go out in the streets. And so myself and Zach and my son Jackson ventured out in the streets, and we did a lot of street shooting. We wore gloves, we wore masks, we sanitized constantly, and we, you know, prayed that we weren't going to catch anything, and we didn't. Why
was it so important to go back and capture those protests specifically for this project?
Chicago, you know, it's the birthplace of community organizing in America. One of the things you see in the first 4 episodes is that there is a vibrant activist and protest-oriented community here. And so when George Floyd hit, it just went on steroids. So it was a very significant part of the story. And it was important to us, though, that we get out and see a lot of peaceful protests, because that's the majority of what was going on, but that we also get our arms around the difficulties and the looting and things like that happened as well, and to present a really faceted and hopefully complex portrait of what that time really meant for this city and I think for the country.
What do we do? That
happens every time one of them get killed. They're right.
It breaks my heart. I got a room full of beautiful Black children and they're all trying to get out.
Have you heard from anyone who was in the documentary about their time in it, and what kind of feedback have you been getting?
Part of our process is that when we get down towards nearing the end of our editing, in our view, we share with principal people in the film. Usually, if we can, we share the whole film. In the case of this, we share their scenes. And I ask them, I say, I want to hear what you think of this. And I'm not handing them editorial control. I can't do that. I make that clear. But it's important to me that they have a chance to see the way in which we are portraying them and to weigh in on it. And the films have changed over the years as a result of that process. In my view, they get better. There have been plenty of times when I say, no, I can't change that. No, I just disagree. But I feel like it's part of the bargain for me as a filmmaker with these people who have given themselves to us, that they at least have that chance and not show up at a film festival or see it, streaming and like, here it is, But we sent it to the main candidates and we heard back from most all of them. And there was a couple of notes here and there, but for the most part, they were pleased with the portrayal. I don't want them to regret having been a part of it, but at the same time, it needs to be candid and honest. So sometimes there's a tricky balance with that.
Would you ever consider doing more City So Real? Is this something where you can see like chapters coming, or are you, going to the next page?
I loved it when I've seen a couple of reviews that said, we wish it were longer, because I don't usually get that. I don't usually get that. We wish it was longer. So I'd be down for more episodes.
All voices. One Chicago.